Welcome to and also take two because Kirk and I are re-recording an episode a week
Word
later.
for word.
Word for word. We're just actually reading a script where we are talking about Christianity in the public square based on a small series of sermons I did in the last couple weeks at Faith Alliance Church. So we're going to talk about the Triumphal Entry found in Matthew 21. And then also, we're going to look at maybe we'll get into the passage where Jesus tells the Pharisees and the Herodians to render to Caesar what is Caesar and render to God's what is God's. We're going to start with the triumphal entry and move backwards. The idea in all of this being how are we called to be public as Christians? What does it mean for us to be public as Christians? I started doing this series because there is a lot of talk in how people or Christians are being public in the world, and I don't know if all of it is helpful. So I wanted to kind of create a frame to where we could talk about helpful ways that the church is supposed to be involved in the world using the triumphal entry. So from that point, Kirk is going to talk all about triumphal entries.
All of them?
Every single one.
Oh, and there's the book that you were talking about.
I did have a book. I did use a book in my research called "The Roman Triumph" by Mary Beard. It's a history of the actual Roman triumph, which was honestly very helpful in my preparation. I haven't finished it, but it's very helpful.
Something that actually, when you were talking about the triumphal entry, that kind of made me think. For anybody who has seen. And sorry for those of you who are offended by this, but for any of you who have seen Guardians of the Galaxy 2, there's a group of people called the Sovereign, right? Right. So the Sovereign are these golden characters, one of whom is the queen of all the other golden characters. And there's a moment where they are leading out
in the snow.
The queen, and there's a character, two characters who are responsible for rolling out this carpet all the way to whomever she needs to speak to, and it snags along the way, but they fix it and they continue on. So there's this extension of ground coverage, so that they remain above it all, right?
Oh, way to make it work. That's
right. So why? So why would you cover the road for a triumphal entry? Because there weren't cars.
Right.
Every mode of transport pooped on the road. So the palm branches make some sense, and then the coats. Oh, wow.
It's more picking them up after.
This is the after, and then you're like, wow, that's some laundry, man.
Yeah.
But in any case, it's still, you're keeping something that you're celebrating, the people that you're celebrating, off the filth, right? It's dusty.
Yeah.
It's stinky. It's busy. You're
right.
It's
a major road.
It's a way in and out. It's the way in and out. I mean, there are a bunch of gates, right, to Jerusalem, but there's a way. One of the ways in and out is through this particular gate, and this particular gate, in order to get in and out, they're making a way, which is raucous, right? They're making this way alongside the temple. It's not just any gate. The gate that they're going in at this point is next to the temple. So people in the temple, on the Temple Mount, can hear it happening.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why they come running out. They're like, hey, whoa. Keep these people down, keep them from making so much noise. Because Romans... Right, but I love the answer. If they didn't, the rocks would cry out.
Yeah,
we can. So this cheering has to happen, whether it's through these humans or just the rocks here. There will be cheering.
Yeah,
because this is the encouraging moment to endure what's coming next.
Actually, that's a good kind of thought as we're thinking through it. I actually like talking about Holy Week when we're not in Holy Week because it feels like Just feels like a good conversation to have. It feels like during Holy Week you should talk about the Triumphal Entry. So it's kind of like you're obligated to. So I like not being obligated to, but still doing it anyhow. So as Jesus is entering Jerusalem, it really, you're right. It's the high point, and then things will go downhill real quickly. Do you think there is so there's a proclamation of kingship? We know that in doing the Triumphal Entry, but Jesus could have. He didn't have to do the Triumphal Entry. He had to fulfill the prophecy of the donkey. So that had to happen.
I bet he's like, man, who wrote this?
Hold, really? But I mean, it didn't have to happen in a triumphal entry way. It could have, there could have been other ways. But he uses that as a declaration of kingship, and he comes in at like 10 out of 10, right? The volume 10, highest. Do you think that was for preparation for people to see it's really like, even when things are going to start crashing down and arrests are going to be made and death is going to happen? Was it to kind of be able to reflect back on this is what it's really like, the Triumphal Entry? Like, what do you think it was supposed to? What's the outcome? What do you think Jesus was trying to do with that crowd specifically? I know what he's trying to do theologically, but
I don't think he was trying to do anything. I think God was.
yeah, right. Okay.
Right, so if there's 3 in 1, right? So you still have, there's that communication, that tie in, that all that. But I think this was a moment, father celebrating son. Right? What you are about to accomplish in the place that you are about to enter is super difficult, but we know it's a victory, and we're cheering for you now.
Huh.
And that is...
Like we're calling it a victory before it's a victory?
It will be a victory.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're calling it like it is before it happens. Or before it happens, yeah. Yeah.
Which is amazing. But, again, existing outside of time,
right.
You can do that. It's pretty amazing, right? That same crowd, super amped up crowd, who even the rocks would have cried out crowd, turns immediately when given that opportunity.
Yeah.
Who do you want? They didn't cheer for Barabbas on the way in.
Right.
He was in chains, right? They're cheering for him, let him loose.
Right.
But yeah, it's wild to imagine that you're cheering for the presumptive victory.
Huh.
Excuse me. So you're cheering for what's about to be accomplished. Even though it's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
Tough to the point of sweating blood. Tough to the point of beaten, crown of thorns, nailed to a cross, whipped. I mean, just everything that no one wants to endure.
Right.
But one and done.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, is it... did anyone ever cheer for their sacrifice, when they were bringing it to the temple? Hooray, we found this completely perfect lamb, this completely perfect ox, any of that? Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, knowing what he's about to go into.
Yeah.
And knowing what's behind him. To help drive him forward, even though there's the let this cup pass from me moment, but not my will, right? That's
well, too, tough. What's interesting is, and I can't tell you how much I love the fact that Jesus just co-opts this whole Roman triumph thing. To me, it's just the most wonderful thing in the world, that he's like, I see what you're doing. I'm gonna make it about real triumph. So I love that part. But so in Roman triumph, like it was, the complete. We have already created conquest. It's all done. So now we are going to celebrate what we've done. In Jesus, it's celebrated first. You're right. It's like a proclamation. It's not a done deal yet. It's a proclamation. But in God's, being outside of time, he's, there's the proclamation and the deed are already complete outside of time. We're just, we're the ones stuck in time, not able to kind of deal with it. So I just like the way that I like the way you placed the proclamation of victory before it even happened as like it's already done
It's a
deal.
celebration of.
It's not even You're right. Actually, and that's. I think that's necessary to say. It's not a proclamation. It is, but it's more than a proclamation. You're right. It's a celebration of victory. Like this is a real parade. It's a party. People are shouting, "Hosanna!" That really kind of changes even the perspective going toward the cross.
And the little weird details that are fascinating, right? So to as you pointed out in the service, donkey not great for riding, right? So the fact that it wasn't just an animal that prefers to not have humans riding on it.
Mm,
It's the baby of.
right.
So stubborn times 100, right? Not understanding what's going on,
And not even knowing, right?
willingly ride. Now you don't hear talk of the disciples dragging this thing against its will.
Yeah.
You don't hear or there's no description of Jesus arguing with this thing like Balaam, right? Right. So, which is one of my favorite moments in the Bible. Why are you arguing with your donkey? And why is it talking back to you? The fact that the donkey has to talk back is even funnier. That's
Final answer.
yeah, it's like, oh, can't you see this? I love that moment. But in any case, yeah, the only other times we hear of people riding on donkeys, Balaam,
Mm.
Jesus, and his mom,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
right? So that I don't think I can remember another moment. I'm sure there's got to be one that someone will point out in the notes, but I those are the only three I can think of.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating to me that, here is the Savior of the world, mother riding on donkey
Mm.
to get to Bethlehem. Again, you don't hear about a lot of tug and pull and arguing with.
Right.
Donkey goes. Maybe very friendly donkey. Maybe this is the great grandchild of that donkey that was set apart because it's not too far from Bethlehem, but it's a ways. And they find this donkey, and the master needs it. Okay, off it goes.
That's funny. Like, I guess. Yeah.
Well, if it's for the master, then. So yeah, off goes the donkey and the colt of the donkey, and rides on it, which is amazing, and it goes where he intends it to go.
Right.
On its own. We
Yeah.
don't hear about any bridle being put on this thing. It just goes
Yeah.
correctly to where he needs to go.
Yeah.
And he can ride along, and I mean, maybe the donkey's like, hey, maybe they're cheering for me.
This is my breed.
This is great. Best day ever, Mom. What are you talking about? No humans. Right, so who knows, but thoughts of donkey. we know that they do think thanks to Balaam. But
But what they think, we're not sure. At least,
perhaps this is what they thought. But yeah, I mean, that scenario is just fascinating. So
back in.
public square, though. So how does that represent Christianity in a public square?
You know that I was talking. Oh, I was in staff meeting today, and I was talking to just the staff about the idea of like, I have found, and I'm probably overcomplicating things, which I have a tendency to do.
Humans don't do that.
No, yeah. So admittedly, probably overcomplicating things. But I find the whole thing very complicated. The whole like how we act in the world, complicated. I should say it contextually complicated. It's not complicated. It's just based on context. So, if we are all people who are in the world, which is what we are, right?
Paul made tents.
What's that?
Paul made tents.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's it. Peter was a fisherman.
Yeah. Right. Oh, right. Yeah.
Real,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. They're doing real trades with. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not the question of if we're public. It's how we're public. And I think for me one of the issues has been how are we going to be public, and then to redefine why. Is it to win arguments? Is it to be right? Is it to,
No.
Right, correct. Yeah, and the answer to both of those, just to be clear, is no.
Yeah.
But sometimes, so I've seen this the last few years, and this is in the evangelical church in America. Like, if we're defining boundaries, I would say that's the boundary. Is that the why has shifted a little bit, and because that the what has shifted, or actually maybe the how we are public in the world, and so the idea of what I didn't want to do is set out here are 3 things that we can do to be public in the world, right? Because I feel like it's so contextual that to do that would only scratch the surface, and it would be honestly disingenuous to say like here are the ways that we're public in the world. Well, I mean, okay, maybe that works over here, but not over in this area. So it was kind of like, okay, well, what is where does Jesus address the powers of the world? Like where in these 2 stories, the render to Caesar and the triumphal entry, he's directly approaching Caesar, not physically, but he's directly encountering the power structure that is Caesar, which represents any worldly power. It's a rough 1-to-1, but it represents earthly power. So I was like, okay, what does Jesus say about it? So render to Caesar I love, because Jesus is like, just like be in the world, go ahead, pay for it. It's like, it's not in God's kingdom, that's not a big deal. Just do it.
Which I think that part, the render to Caesar part, there is a moment when taxes are due, and Peter says, "We have nothing," and Jesus says, "Go catch the fish."
I love that story. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, okay. Yeah.
There it is.
Because he's a fisherman, he has to go catch a fish, and
Yeah.
poof, what do you know? Caught a fish. There's your money. Here you go, buddy.
Go ahead. Be a part.
And on we go. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like my favorite part of that story is how nonplussed Jesus is about the whole thing. Like, just render to Caesar what's Caesar. Just not a big deal.
The great part of that story too is that imagining that along the way there's somebody who dropped a coin, and Jesus knew that they were going to drop that coin overside of the boat. The fish was going to swallow it, and it made it to wherever they were, and Peter would catch it in time.
Pick it up.
Yeah. And that's amazing.
Yeah, it is a good story.
I love that chain of events. It's so perfect.
It's just the sovereignty plays in it. I like that. And then the Caesar one is I liked it because it's a little bit more, to me it's a little bit more direct. Like he's not speaking to Caesar, of course. He's not even speaking against Caesar's power. What I think Jesus is doing is he's redefining what triumph is. He's not saying don't do Caesar. Well, he's not directly saying don't do this way or means of triumph. He's not directly saying that. What he's directly saying is follow Christ's way of triumph. So the kingdom of the world and the kingdom of the earth, to me, is like, I think in God's mind, I think I can make the case biblically, theologically, is that it's not like a competitive, like this for that. Well, we don't do this, and in order not to do this, we do that. I think God's way of doing things, the kingdom of heaven, is so radically different that instead of it being like pushing against the powers of the world, it's like, no, the kingdom of heaven is so different and so incredibly, massively larger, more beautiful, more loving, all these things, that when we participate in that, it's like those things aren't even an issue. So it's not a competition. Like it's not a comparison or a competition.
Your little power exists over here. We're just doing
right, and it
there.
exists. It's there. It's there, and Jesus never, he never denies it, and he never overthrows it. He's like, you don't. And one of my favorite things he says is when he's before Pilate, and he's like, don't you know that I could ask for it in 10,000 legions of angels, or 100 legions of angels, or whatever, 10,000 angels.
More than one,
which is really all you need. Could be at my side, and just the idea of Jesus holds heaven and earth in his hands, and he doesn't use it to overpower the world. He doesn't need to. He's like, have your power in the world. That's fine. There's something much greater at stake and greater that you can be a part of. I like the way that Jesus addresses power because he does use earthly patterns and structures like the Triumphal Entry to communicate heavenly realities. But in doing so, it's so much. He communicates something so much better that you're like, oh, all right, well, I don't even need Caesar's power. I want this. So anyway, I think that the public squares. I know you didn't really ask a question, but I've been thinking a lot about it. So it's like all spilling out. But the idea of um, how are we public using the things that Christ gives us in the world, meaning that I want to go back to places where Jesus addresses the power structures in the world. I just like the way he does it.
So that's interesting to me because thinking about the triumphal entry, that's not something that gets repeated
Right.
by the disciples, right?
Right.
Or anybody after.
Yeah.
It is one time, and again because of I think the celebration of the victory.
Because there's one victory.
Because there's one victory,
Huh.
and that ends there, right? That celebration happens, and so to me, it's an interesting perspective to see. You call that out for the public square idea, right? To be in the world and to highlight that moment. Because to me, more the more in the world portion, right, of his life would be having dinner with Zacchaeus.
Yeah. Yeah. So I totally agree.
But I see how you see that like addressing power.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to start with now I had 2 weeks and I might end up doing more, but I wanted to because I think the national conversation. I could be wrong on this, but I feel like I think that the national conversation is so revolved around politics and issues of power and how the church, the evangelical American church to be specific, uses power that I wanted to redefine what Jesus' power is according to how he addresses Caesar both times.
I don't think we have to redefine. It is clearly defined. But
you're right. Yes. Yes.
Right. So, but people go at it as if they feel single-handedly compelled to set up the kingdom of God as they perceive it.
As exactly to that they feel responsible to set up the kingdom of God. One, two, as they perceive it. Yeah.
And how do they get paid doing it?
Right. And yeah. Right. Yeah.
So that's completely opposite of everything Jesus stood for or did.
Right. And that's where. So if I were to do like 3 more messages on this or 4, whatever, it's arbitrary. Then I would want to say, okay, here's what Jesus did in response to power. We'll say, and that moves, and so I was trying to think like large, and obviously politics is an easy target. The political structures of the world, it's an easy target only because it's just there. But any structure in the world that uses force, uses authority, uses power, is going to because it's of the world is going to end up using it improperly. Even churches use power improperly because we
Absolute
forget
power.
Jesus. Yeah. Right. We forget
right.
Jesus's call to what power is. But if I were to continue on, then I would move into okay. So what's our? Because what I didn't say, just to your point, is we didn't talk about the responsibility of. We talked about here that let's redefine this. We didn't talk about what's the church's responsibility?
So looking at what Jesus does in regard to power, right? So why does anyone have power, really? Because they want to or they claim to be able to respond to needs in the community, right? So responding to needs in the community, be it security, be it food needs, whatever needs. Jesus answers all those on his own with whatever's on hand.
Right. You're right. Yeah.
So all needs are being met. So if all needs are being met, what's the purpose of all that other stuff?
Right.
Right. So in Roman times, we end up with as on the the silent episode that happened before today.
This.
we were talking about how there are aqueducts and roads and bridges and buildings and amphitheaters and lots of architecture
Yeah.
and public service stuff set up by the Romans that's still standing.
Right. Yeah.
Take note, town of Attleboro, but still standing after 1,000 years, right? A long, long time.
Right.
I mean, we're at 2,000 years.
That's
and
right.
Some of that stuff's still standing. Amazing.
Yeah.
But that aside, yeah, someone had to do that, right? Oops, slaves. But it was amazing design and engineering, and someone does it, and someone had to get paid to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Jesus is like, yeah, you need a denarius. You bet.
Right.
Take
And that's right. And that's where and one of the things that I think this guy named John Howard Yoder, I think it was him who said it about that passage, the render, is he's like, you have to keep in mind that Jesus does not set up God is greater, but he's not setting up in that situation a hierarchy where he says, forget Caesar, just give to God. He's and so he places God and Caesar in the same theater, this same social theater. And I think that's pretty important because it gives credit to, like, it's not to say that while we get our definitions of power mixed up and we end up taking too much from Caesar in the long run, that doesn't mean that the civic responsibilities of the person are bad. Like, aqueducts are not, well, Roman aqueducts are not, they're not bad. Roads are not bad.
All the crosses along those roads, however, were kind of awful.
Right. It's and that's
the
and
response to some of the
and that's where we kind of get our definitions. But it's like so that's why I do like that Jesus is like, yeah, like, by all means, like, let's build those roads. Let's make sure there is a civic and social ethic that's built into Christianity that we're like, we need to be a part of the city or the area, the region, that we need to be good citizens.
You have friends and neighbors.
And
right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's a great point.
Jesus didn't come in and hit people over the head. He
Yeah.
just wandered through town.
Yeah.
And people came. They tried to hit him over the head and throw him off a cliff.
Right.
But generally speaking, he just said and did what he was there to say and do. And people came because they had been, despite the fact they were the people who had a temple and synagogues to discuss and worship God. It had become kind of dry, right? Because it was ritual, and rituals become empty.
Yeah.
So they're bringing the life back to it, being the smoke and the light, right? Right, the pillar that that we had just talked about in Exodus, to be the presence. And I think that's the responsibility for us, is to be the reflection of the presence, because we're a distorted reflection as it is, right?
Right, as it is, yeah.
All of us are have foibles.
Yeah.
All of us have foibles, right? But we can do our best to try to, shout. There are some people whose role it is to shout from the mountaintops, and it's not everybody.
That does not mean that. Well, I don't know if I said this on Sunday, but I wrote it somewhere, and I may have said it, but we seem to think that the only tool that the church is supposed to use is like a hammer.
No, yeah, or like megaphone. Right?
Or like a megaphone. It's
yeah.
Well, no, maybe we need to be a magnifying glass, or like a scalpel, or like a toothpick or something. Like, maybe there's some more gentle, subtle tools that we can use.
Yeah.
That don't need to be so loud and brash.
Because a lot of times, the one thing people need is just an arm on a shoulder.
Yeah, and
You just are there
Yeah.
for somebody else who's having a really tough time. And I'm pretty sure everybody knows somebody who's having a tough time.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Being the representation of love by being genuinely loving.
Yeah.
That's the whole deal. And loving people that you already know.
Right, that are already in your world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, you're not going crazy for it. But, I mean, there's opportunity and there are personalities designed deliberately for exactly that, right?
Yeah.
Mission outreach and going to put into really tough
Right.
situations. But it's not everyone, and most people have a skill and a connection to be able to interact with people in their world. Some of which they're familiar with, right? So everybody's familiar with the people around them, and the jobs that they do.
Yeah, you don't have to cold call. Like, you don't
No,
have to be like,
please don't.
yeah, well, and that's the other thing. Yeah, not only do you not
Right.
have to, please
Yeah.
do not. But you know, like, it's not like you have to find people to.
No.
And I would say, well, you know, one of the things, you know, we're really looking at church-wide is I think is like, as we think about future and we think about future, you mentioned relationship, is that, you know, as the world kind of fragments. And I'm not being dystopian, by the way, when I say fragment. I'm just like, you know.
I think that has made itself evident.
Yeah,
since 2019.
Right. We're just kind of relationally like fragmenting. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But you know, if anybody in the world is going to get relationships right, Christians should get relationships right. Like we should be. There should be, and I'm not saying like. We don't have to get production stuff right, big event stuff right, none of that stuff. We don't have to get that right, but we should have people in our city knocking on our door saying, how do you guys love each other so well? Like, can you tell us more about that? Like, because that's, or even, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the loving your enemy thing, and I think I've mentioned this to you or, you know, somewhere, but like, what other organization on the face of the planet says love your enemy? Nobody. Like nobody, or maybe, you know, very few people, but for us, for the Christian, you know, to love your enemy is not something radical. It's just standard, right? Is to embrace your enemy first. That's the that is the standard practice.
Jesus didn't hit back.
Right. That's the standard practice of Christianity is
Right.
to love your enemy. Nobody else is saying so. So I've been thinking a lot about relationships. Okay, so that's a standard practice, is to go that far. No one wants to love their enemy, but we're supposed to do it just as like, oh, it's a Tuesday? Yeah, we have to love our enemy, you know. Then how much more should we be loving toward each other? How much more should we be caring and generous? And then when we do, because we have foibles, you're right, when we do mess up, that we go back and we forgive and we apologize. The world should be looking at the church and be like, wow, they are really getting relationships right. The world doesn't look on us for that, you know, for a million reasons. But all that to say is, I think if we're gonna grow in an area, and I'm kind of speaking, I would love to see it larger, but now I'm speaking more locally to us. If we're gonna grow in an area, it should really be relationships. We should get really good at figuring out how to do relationships well, because the world wants it. Like, the world needs relationships because we've kind of lost that. And B, that's, you know, God calls us to love God and love others. So our relationship with God, we've got to be really good at, and our relationship with others. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I think that's something that we can work on. So all that to say is, what I love about all this conversation, even just, you know, even the Christians in the public square, is like, we should be the best at relationships. What I love about it is it's not like crazy. This is just like love God, love your neighbor stuff, but it's just, now we have to like push all the other stuff away and say, okay, this has got to be a focus on how do we actually love God, and then apply that into loving people next to us. So that I think like, if you want an application of Christians in the public square, that's really the application, is actually being really good at relationships.
Which is where I get back to Zacchaeus.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah.
So there's somebody who was an enemy, right?
Right. Yeah. That's a great point.
Here's a tax collector, which were enemies of the state in consideration. Yeah. But that, I think, is the beautiful part about the statement, love your enemy. because they can't stay an enemy if you love them.
That's good. Yeah.
So once you are loving toward, they're just now very confused. Why? Huh?
What's going on?
Why are all my efforts not making you angry?
Yeah.
And there's nothing to fight back against, right?
Yeah.
That's powerful, actually, and difficult, and takes humility, and takes a lot of love. Not a lot of people have real enemies per
Right.
se.
Yeah.
Like, but it happens.
Right.
There's plenty of them out there,
Yeah.
and a lot of time we make enemies, like on the highway, for example. That guy cut me off.
Right.
Right. So there's temporary enemies.
Yeah.
But to stay as the reflection of the heavenly, right?
Yeah.
To imagine that that's your real role.
Yeah.
That requires a lot.
Well, and you even think about how much it takes. So let's even the road rage stuff. It is even if we're creating momentary enemies, it's easy to hate somebody. It's easy to be angry at somebody. It's
Sure.
easy to chide and all that stuff. I've told other pastors, I said, I think the real work of ministry is not growing jaded, is learning how to do ministry in such a way that you don't grow jaded by people and that you remain open and loving to people. So I think it's so easy to get jaded, to be angry, but it's so when you get cut off, like my first reaction is I just get angry real quick, and that's the easy response. How much harder is it? I'm just kind of parroting back what you said. How much harder is it when you do get cut off to be like, that's right, go ahead, you can cut me off.
Well, there's that response. There's also the response of I have boundaries. Right, there are boundaries in a relationship that are healthy. So you can't let yourself get walked on.
Well, right. Correct.
Right?
That's not what I mean. Yeah, you are right.
But you can respond in a loving way, like, "Wow, that was a crazy choice."
Right. Yeah. 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 And that's you're right.
So
that's a good point.
I agree that the turn the other cheek concept doesn't necessarily mean because I love getting beat up.
Right. Yes.
It's because you've turned the other cheek to say, "Is this really what you need?" Right? Do you feel better now?
So you are making the difference. I think that boundaries are a good thing. So you are making a choice to say I'm going to turn the other cheek versus I'm being walked all over. I'm not giving.
This is my role. I'm the doormat. That is not it.
Right. Correct. Because that removes agency entirely. You have no agency in that. Versus when you say, "Is this really what you like?" Fine. You can Is this really what you need? Turn the other cheek. Then you are making a conscious choice to say, I'm loving you, and is this really what you need to... Yeah, that's a great distinction. So...
and now you can see how that ties into the Triumphal Entry.
Yes. Well, but I think...
Yeah, but it's strange, right? It's a backwards response from a corrupt world.
Yeah, it's entirely different, and I think it's not only to do it. I think the trick is, Jesus talks about forgiveness. He's like, how many times should I forgive her? Peter says, should we do it 7 times? And Jesus is like, no, 70 times 7. It's like there's no limit. So I think the issue, especially for the Christian in this culture, is not that we do it once, but that we do it 100 times. That our role is to stay. Our role is to stay and maintain, keep boundaries, but to really work on, okay, what do we have to do in order to love our neighbor well? What do we have to do in order to love the person that cut us off? What do we have to do?
What does that love look like?
And what does that love look like? So I think that when I think about the ultimate expression, it really is those things. But I wanted to redefine some things first. But I think the way that Jesus deals with Zacchaeus and Lazarus was a friend, but with other people that were
the Mary Magdalene,
Right.
Or the woman who had the blood issue that touched
Right.
his cloak, right?
Yeah.
All that. That's being out in the public space.
Yeah, even even you think of Judas.
Judas.
Like
Yeah,
even the way
that's
he dealt with
huge.
Judas, like if you whatever you're gonna do quickly. Just kind of this. Yeah, it's an amazing ability to love people. And again, I know he knew that Judas did that to fulfill prophecy, but still, like to be able to like not say it cynically or sarcastically.
The
"Oh,
sting
whatever
of
you
that
do."
paper cut must have been awful.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have to take it.
Right. And
it's part of the gig. But oof.
And Jesus is able to do it well. So I think given, in fact, this just kind of continues to prove my like for this podcast is that this kind of pulls out a little bit more than I could do on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
It helps to kind of bring definition to what it means to actually be public. What does that look like? I may pick it back up in the new year. Partially even for conversations like this to be like, okay, how do we actually do this? So on that note, stay tuned. We'll end that on a cliffhanger. So on one end, we'll resolve it and say it's how do we love others well, and keep loving others well. That's the resolution. The cliffhanger is maybe we pick it up again in the new year. This idea of Christianity in the public square. So until then.
Do we want to do the lead up into Advent? The entry versus the announcement?
Oh, yeah, let's finish with that. So we'll finish with one idea as we move into Advent. Kirk is going to share, because he said it before the podcast began, and it was such a good thought. I didn't want to waste it. I wanted to use it in the podcast, and I forgot about it. So, but we'll close on that, because that's a good entry as we move into Advent.
So, Advent coming up. So we're talking about Triumphal Entry. So, huge celebration. Even the rocks will cry out. At the same token, that's for the accomplishment that's about to occur. The excitement of heaven at the accomplishment that is the delivery of the Savior of the world. All heaven cheers at Advent, right? The angels shout and sing. The shepherds come with all the sheep and come to find the baby. The wise men come. I mean, it's just an amazing series of things, all in celebration of a triumphal entry. Entry into the world, entry into exiting the world.
That's good. That is a good welcome to the Advent season. So the next time we'll talk during Advent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.